Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to Cutting the Distance Field Reports, breaking news from the Elkwoods. And now, your host, Jason Phelps.
Welcome to Cutting the Distance Field Report here. I just got done hunting Idaho with Garrett Bowen of Top Priority. Unfortunately, he had to run back home real quick for some work and then get ready for another hunt. So I'm just going to kind of wrap up what we saw here in Idaho myself. So we started the hunt on September 21st. Bulls were bugling. One thing we did notice right out of the gate is that these bulls weren't necessarily locating from across canyons, or they weren't locating from long distances. So as we kind of developed a strategy, we would hear them bugle, but they were bugling, I would say, kind of lackluster, a little bit on their own. Weren't necessarily interested in responding to location bugles, to cow calls, anything like that. So we realized early on we were going to have to definitely, no pun intended, cut the distance, get very, very close in order for them to respond to our bugles. But what we did find, which was a little surprising, is when we did cut the distance to under 300 yards, the bulls were very callable. So that's kind of the quick summary of the hunt. So on day one, right out of the gate, we climbed some distance. One thing about these Idaho bulls, any stand of dark timber surrounded by quakies seemed to hold elk. So that wasn't necessarily a problem. Maybe not in large numbers, but we were always able to be an elk every morning and every evening. The frustrating part was then getting them to do what we wanted to do. So back to opening morning, we climb up. We don't hear a lot opening morning. We're on the south side of a ridge, climb up, and as soon as we drop over the north side, we get there about 8:30. The canyon's lighting up. We've got what we assume to be the herd bull straight across from us, and we're assuming herd bull only because of the size of the bugle, the wrast, the depth, all of those things. He bugles 3 or 4 times on his own. We haven't even made a call to this point, and while we're making our approach based on the wind, we're trying to get down and under him. So we can get across. Another bull bugles at 150 yards down the ridge. We've got good enough wind on him that he won't wind us. Set up to start cow calling. We set Garrett up, 50, 60 yards ahead of me. Start the cow call. Just like so many times on this trip, never to hear the elk again. And as I had mentioned earlier, we had multiple bulls going in this area, a satellite near the herd bull, plus this bull that bugled on our side of the ridge. Once we cow called, we didn't hear any more elk from that point on. We didn't hear the elk within 150 yards of us. We didn't hear the elk across the canyon from us. We didn't hear the satellite across the canyon from us. So a little bit of a frustrating start to how are we going to approach these elk. So you kind of go back to the drawing board and to piggyback onto Oregon, I'm really starting to question, is our system going to work? Are we going to locate elk? Are we going to get close? Are we going to cow call or bugle them in? Or are we going to have to continue to just spot and stalk and move in on these things? And that's not the why. It's not the reason why I'm out there in September. I want to call to bugling bulls that are interested in being tricked. So I may have or may not have forgotten my elk tag in my office desk. So Garrett hunted that first day. We jumped off the mountain drove back into town, got that all taken care of, kind of sacrificed a night to just scouting. Where are the elk going to be? What should we do? And so we made the decision, after looking at OnX, we're gonna go in for 2 days or 3 days and 2 nights. We're gonna spike in. So that next morning, we all loaded up. We take off at the trail at 5. We get up there. Once again, we can hear bugles as we're hiking up the trail through some great elk country, but nothing. You hear a bugle, you stop and listen for it to bugle again, and we would wait, and we wouldn't hear a second or a third bugle. And you kind of start to lose confidence or faith in that bugle. And so we would leave it and move up. And so by the time we finally get to where we want to set spike camp, we drop our camp, and we've had a bull bugle across the drainage a couple times, and we decided it's close enough to go after. So we jump in on that one, and this is kind of where it all starts to come together. Is as we got close, this bull is very, very callable, very, very interactive. And so it kind of at that point had set the stage for, all right, these bulls are at least callable. So we just learned at that point, these elk are going to be workable. We just have to get close. So to fast forward, another thing, kind of an underlying theme of this whole hunt were, back-to-back days is it gets closer to the end of September, we expect the rut to start to pick up. And we would get a day, we would get a day that was extremely good, multiple bulls calling on their own, responsive to calls, and for one reason or another, we could or couldn't, we weren't able to make it work. But then we would show up in the same area, put all of those eggs in the basket on the next day, and for one reason or another, the area was dead, even though we could still spot the elk with our binos, or we would get enough responses throughout the day that we knew the elk were still there. They just weren't anything like they were the day before. Me wanting to break that down and understand why, I believe a lot of it is, cows in the area, whether they're coming into estrus versus maybe they were taken care of, or, maybe that bull had pushed her off. I don't know what the reason is, but it was definitely, kind of very cyclical and very quick. You wouldn't expect it to be on fire one day and dead the next day and then back on fire. So it was very frustrating to, maybe go in with certain expectations. But it's hunting, it's elk hunting. We've learned to just accept that, the only thing that's certain is uncertainty when it comes to elk hunting, and you just had to deal with it. You still had to work hard. We still had to, go find the elk. And once you did get close, they were definitely playable. One thing, on some call-ins that is very, very hard for somebody that's elk calling, and I definitely had to test my patience a little bit more, is in some of these timber patches, you can see a long ways, and we would get bulls pretty fired up, answering bugles, answering cow calls, or the combination thereof, and getting that bull worked up, and stomping on his bugles, mimicking him, making sure that we're kind of setting the tempo. And then these bulls, when they got to 100 yards, would come in silent, which makes it very, very difficult, especially as we're trying to break brush. We're trying to, fake raking a tree, do some of those things that requires us to move. And then the bull to come in silent was a little bit difficult. And so we had kind of, we were setting the shooter up a little bit further, 50, 60 yards in front of whoever was calling and doing the raking, just so it would kind of, we would avoid drawing any attention to the shooter. But even then, there were multiple times where as the raker and caller, I could see that bull plain as day, and I would have to almost freeze, which I think can be a little confusing to an elk. You've been raking and calling from a certain location for a set amount of time, and then all of a sudden you have to go completely, silent. And that is due to one, you don't want to be seen. And number two, that bull can now see where he expects that bull or cow to be, and things just don't add up. So I think that could have been a little bit of a detriment. I would have loved to set up in different locations or different, spots, so that we could have prevented that visual, visual location, visual identity from that bull to where he expects a cow or bull to be. But some of these, big timbered slopes, the elk are where they are, and you have to make do with what you can. But ideally, we would have set up, near terrain breaks, near vegetation breaks, where we would have forced that bull to pull through and then be at an archery range. So Silent bulls are very tough to deal with, especially when we're making decisions on that. And then the other thing we struggled with a lot, which I've experienced more so in New Mexico where it gets very, very hot during the middle of the day. It was very hot in Idaho this past week, and so what we're getting is some good action from maybe 7 to 9 in the morning, and then the elk are in bed. There, you could tell when those bulls were on their feet bugling versus when they were now in their bed bugling. By 9:15, 9:30, which makes it very difficult to hunt. You're now having to get within shooting distance of their bed. You've got multiple eyes looking at you. Even if it's satellite bulls, there's noise, there's brush, very, very dry, tough to stalk in without everything looking at you. Added some level of difficulty to this hunt. The other thing that we experienced on this hunt, which really kind of played out towards the end of the hunt, is the high country in this unit was very, very dry. What I would consider main creeks and main draws coming out of the high country were completely void of water, which, my normal thinking is if I can't live here, an elk's going to have trouble living here. We weren't able to find wallows. We went and looked at springs. Some of these things we just weren't coming up with any way for these things to drink. What we noticed is that these elk were coming, 3 to 4 miles down the water. They would water at night, and then in the morning they would reverse that, and it would be like a chase back up to the bedding. So after a couple days of doing that, at nighttime, they would get out of bed, they would hang up on the mountain, they would do their feeding. But in the morning, if you wanted to chase these elk, it was more of a cat and mouse game as they went 3 to 4 miles back to where they wanted to bed. So I think if we would have figured that out earlier and identified that, we could have intercepted them, further up the mountain. But, these elk are good at climbing mountains. They're climbing, 1,500 to 2,000 feet. Every morning, and it's a definite chase, and it's a definite, we've always got the wind in our favor. These elk are working into the wind, they're walking into the wind, but we're also chasing them. So it's just kind of that cat and mouse game that can get very, very difficult. Like I said, if we could have identified that earlier, maybe went back to spiking out above them and intercepted them, it would have been a better play. Now, there would always be the issue of, as they're walking up the hill in the morning, how do we keep our wind off to the side and make sure we don't, get winded? But that's something we could have definitely dealt with just staying far enough off to the side or figuring out a right ridge to kind of intercept them. So yeah, I think, in my opinion, the rut is just starting to kick in. It's late September right now. Things are just starting to get cranking there, and I think in Idaho they're gonna experience a better rut into the first part of October. And one thing, I'm never one to say, oh, the rut's super late, or use that as an excuse to justify, maybe a hunting season that didn't go as I planned. But I'm pretty confident that over the last 4 or 5 years, with some of the later springs, some of the later winters, and everything being set back, I am starting to maybe, come to terms with or settle on the idea that the rut is getting a little bit later, at least over the last 4 or 5 years. Where we used to experience, great rut action starting September 10th on, and there are spots in the country, where the rut is on fire by September 10th. So like I said, I just feel like the overall consensus is that it's moving back a little bit, where we're getting a real strong peak of the rut, September 30th to October 10th versus, some of the areas I've hunted being, September 20th to 30th. So it's a very, very small reset. But from what I've seen in Idaho, the rut is just getting going. It's more consistent. Day to day is more action, and I think the rut's going to be strong into the middle of October this year. But that's kind of our field report from Idaho. It was a good hunt. It had a lot of action. Quite a few bulls in at close range. So overall a good hunt in Idaho, and. Appreciate you tuning in to Cutting the Distance. Hopefully wherever you're at, the elk rut was going good and you found some success. Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.